Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome once again to Agahi with your host, Warisa Zainab. We try to cover a topic related to your mental health and your psychological well-being in every single episode of Agahi. And today, inshallah, we will be addressing the challenges that are faced by refugees, asylum seekers, and immigrants, because they tend to experience more mental health challenges and poor mental health than the local population. To address this issue, we have a fantastic guest today with us who is joining us all the way from Birmingham. We've got Dr. Mahmood Nasiri, who is a consultant psychiatrist working in NHS Birmingham and has over 10 years of experience working in the eating disorder department, and he has also been serving the local community for a very long time. And inshallah, we'll welcome our guest today. Assalamu alaikum, Dr. Mahmood.
Walaikum assalam, Warisa. Thank you for having me. Thank you, the TV, for having me on your channel today.
We're absolutely honored to have you again. The topic that we're going to cover today is regarding the mental health challenges that are experienced by the refugee and immigrant population. So let's begin addressing the show. If you could tell our audience, because this is a live call-in show, and I always encourage the audience to call into the studio if they have any questions that they would like to ask our guest. Could you give us a historical perspective of immigration itself and what it involves?
So basically, Warisa, people have migrated from one place to another since the start of human existence, really. These are for all kinds of reasons and for varying amounts of time and durations. According to a UN statistic, 1 out of 3 people in this world live and work in a different place to where they were born. Migration can be of many types, but mainly it can be within a country or between countries. Within a country is more common in lower and middle income countries where mostly migration is seen between from rural areas to urban areas to big cities in search of employment. And then there's transnational migration, that is from one country to another, again in search of a better life, economic improvement, material improvement, improvement in security for better physical health, psychological health. In the last 2 centuries, transnational migration, that is travel between 2 countries, has become regulated and difficult, because of all the passport and visa systems having been developed in the last 100-200 years. And this has led to barriers in free migration and travel, and that might have previously happened quite freely. According to a statistic that I was looking at the UK Gov website, nearly about 175,000 applications for permanent stay in UK or naturalization are made to the UK UKBA, and of that, about 150,000 are granted each year. Although this has been a bit reduced because of the COVID pandemic, but that's the scale of things that are there. And I think about 23 million passengers land in the UK every year. I'm not talking about just about migration, but visitors. And out of them, you can imagine how many people come with different agendas, and from normal small visits to longer term migration. So that's the UK perspective of the migration, and I think the historical scene as well.
Yes, if you look at the statistics for other countries, for example, Lebanon, 1 out of every 5 people living in Lebanon is a refugee itself. Same with countries like in the Middle East, where people have escaped war zones and conflict regions. So there is like an influx of refugees. And even like you mentioned, the different types of immigrants. You have the internally, locally displaced people who have moved from one area to another seeking safety. You spoke about the types, types of migrants. What about the stages?
So basically, from a scientific and a research point of view, the process of migration are divided into three stages. So a pre-migration stage, a migration stage, and a post-migration stage. So pre-migration stage is where people make up their minds, start preparing making the big move. This
Mhm.
can be with them getting their financial resources together, making up their mind, picking up the courage from a psychological point of view,
Yeah.
and then and this can be quite variable as well, where sometimes they don't get much opportunity about on the pre-migration stage, where they have to just make a run from a natural disaster or a war zone. So that's the pre-migration stage, and
Yeah.
the migration stage is the actual stage because of easy travel these days. It can be easy for some people, where many of them take a flight and land up in a different country. But believe
Mm.
me, I've seen cases where they've taken months going on trucks from one country to another country to another country, living at one place at points of time in for different durations, and then landing up in the country that they finally and eventually settle in. So this can be the migration phase as such. And then there's the post-migration phase. Once they've reached their new country, their host country, and
Yeah.
uh, and that has psychological issues or impact on mental health of its own. So each stage of migration comes with its own unique set of mental health points of views and mental health issues.
Yeah, and I think we see so many examples around, especially for people living in the UK. You see how many, I think, according to one of the statistics, approximately 10,000 people arrive at one of the Greek islands to seek refuge, and most of them don't even make it alive because of the challenges involved in being on a boat in harsh weather conditions and making that journey all the way from Middle Eastern countries like Iraq and Syria, Afghanistan to Europe to seek refuge. And then the conditions that they have to face within the refugee camps, that's a totally different set of challenges altogether. So,
Of course.
what impact does it have on a person's psychological well being? Because we see numerous studies and researches talking about how poor their mental health becomes as a result of the trauma they have already faced, escaping the country, and then to face new set of challenges while they're seeking refuge.
That's a very relevant question, Warisa. First of all, I mean, while kind of elaborating on the impact of migration on mental health, I'll kind of give a generalized answer covering all areas of migration, not just refugees. I would say I would include people who voluntarily migrate as well. But the impact of migration on individuals' mental health is multifaceted and affects different aspects of the individual, whether it is biological, social, or psychological points of view. Migration involves a series of losses for the one who moves, such as loss of the family, loss of a familiar
Yeah.
society. There can be losses of both emotional and structural nature that are experienced by the migrants. The relationship between social inequalities and mental health is well known, and it is inevitable that if migrants suffer from social and economic inequalities, they're also likely to suffer from mental ill health. Though
Mhm.
the mediating factors may very well vary, and they might also depend on how the person is built generally.
Yeah. Yeah.
But human migration, uh, it's a reality. It's a global phenomenon,
Yes.
and
Yes.
according to the available evidence, it's on the increase, and it's going to increase more.
Yeah.
Uh, and it can occur due to various reasons. What we defined as push factors and pull factors. So
Mm.
push factors can be, where the conditions in a native place from where the migrant is moving have become so unfavorable, say like war or natural calamity
Yeah.
or conflict, uh, that they are pushed away from
Hmm.
their native places, or they can be pull factors, which might be people moving, seeking improvement in their educational status, in their economic status, employment, for better health, as I said. Whatever be the cause of the relocation, the outcome requires individuals to adjust to their new surroundings and
Hmm.
cope with stresses involved. As a result, there is considerable potential for disruption to their mental and physical health. It covers migration in wider sense and does not limit itself to refugee
Yes.
problems, as I said earlier.
But research indicates that unfortunately, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, they don't get enough support when it comes to mental health comparatively to the local population. Why is that?
So there can be many barriers to migrants getting the exact help that they need, and
Mm.
that they deserve. Uh,
Yeah.
and I'll come in a bit to what should be done, but usual reasons that I come across in my practice, uh, uh, coming across, and dealing with cases of mental ill health with migrants, very common of them are language barrier to start with.
Mm. Yeah.
In this country, at least, where people are not familiar with English, and that stops them from seeking help. To availability of resources. So if someone is in a refugee camp in
Mm.
Calais, then they might not have access to proper facilities. Although the UN Human Rights uh, Committee has specified rules for each country to provide
Yeah.
appropriate healthcare to refugees. But not only refugees, people who migrate and are in this country, they might still, hesitate to seek help. This might be due to lack of confidence in a new environment. This can be
Yes.
due to lack of awareness of mental illness. They don't know about the resources that are available to them in this country.
Yeah.
There might be fear of seeking help. I come across a lot of people who have moved, migrated because having married to a partner here and are facing domestic violence in their relationships, and they're scared that going to a GP might upset their spouses or the spouses' families.
Mm.
That is quite commonly seen in mental health practice as well. There might be stigma attached to mental health issues, as we see in normal practice, even apart from migrant. So these are
Yes.
various reasons
Mm.
which lead to migrants not getting proper help that they need. Now, um, there is a big push from Royal Colleges of Psychiatrists and from various agencies that help and deal with migrants for the health services to rise up to the occasion. And I can speak about UK because I've worked here for the last
Yes.
16 years in this mental health system, but there is a big push in terms of getting the staff trained in proper cultural issues. So we call the term cultural sensitivity, making the staff more culturally sensitive. That is, staff being aware of the issues from where the migrants have come,
Yeah.
and it might also be that we facilitate appointments by way of interpreters to overcome the
Yes.
language barrier. We increase the resources, allocate more resources to help the migrants, which are deemed as a very vulnerable group, both not only for mental health but also for physical health issues.
Talking about vulnerability, I'm really glad you mentioned that. One of the things that is becoming really common these days, and every time I read in the news, it really breaks my heart. Young people, yeah, as young as 25-year-olds, 24-year-olds who have escaped a war zone, a conflict region. They have lost everything, not just their livelihood or their homes, but their loved ones. And now the only hope they have is to leave everything behind and start afresh. And they take that major risk of leaving their country, traveling on a boat or whatever they can find to cross the border. And they reach this country hoping that the government are going to welcome them, give them a safe place. But sometimes it doesn't work out like that, and they're stuck in the refugee camps for months
Mhm.
and years without basic sanitation services or food or medical support. And like you mentioned, a very important point, that language itself is a barrier. And my own personal experience working with refugees, I know that people who are unable to speak, say for example Greek, they're stuck in Moria camp or Calais, and there's an emergency within the camps, within the refugee camps. They cannot even contact the ambulance or the local A&E because of language barrier or the fact that the camp is in such an isolated place. By the time ambulance arrives, the person has already died. And then you have incidences of people attempting suicide, killing themselves because they have reached a point in their life where they have lost hope. Talk about trauma that they experience. Tell our viewers about the traumatic experience of being a refugee or an immigrant or an asylum seeker.
So there is a minor difference between refugee and an asylum seeker for the benefit of your audience. So a refugee is someone who has been involuntarily pushed out of their native place because of the war zone or the conflict or a natural calamity, whereas asylum seekers have opted to move out to escape whatever unfavorable conditions that they have similar to the refugees. So that's a minor difference. But nonetheless, as you mentioned, they come with a lot of psychological baggage involved with their traumatic experiences back home. And we see a lot of incidents and prevalence of PTSD among them,
Yes.
traumatic psychological experiences that they come with. This can be because of the fighting or the war they have experienced, the killing and destruction they have witnessed firsthand that in the zone that they came from. This can be also I've seen a lot of migrants from Central Europe where they started to migrate, and especially women when they were because of their gender exposed to human trafficking
Mm,
experiences and abuse because of that. Um,
yeah.
we see a lot of history of trauma, and as I was referring to in the stages of migration, this comes in the stage of migration where people have either before moving or during the process have faced extreme traumas that we can't imagine sitting here in our
Yes.
cozy homes. And this carries a lot of effect. And they have, uh, in my experience, without proper professional help, they are
Mm,
doomed for their life to live in the experiences, as you know how difficult experiencing a PTSD can be, reliving those traumatic moments every day of their life, waking up to horrific nightmares, reliving flashbacks of those
yes.
situations. And it's very important that they are offered the right amount of right help professionally. And I think it's the duty of the host country to
Mm.
be able to make that help available to them.
This reminds me. I've heard this from people in the refugee camps who are literally stuck in a like a detention center, you can say, and for them to experience everything after leaving their home country seeking safety. Some people even say that, if we had any idea of what life is going to be like in these camps, we would have never taken the step of leaving our countries. We would have preferred to die in our homeland rather than to come here and experience discrimination on the basis of their religion and race. Women, you know, telling about their horrific experiences of molestation within the camps not being a safe space for young people, children, women. There are like frequent incidences of fights within the camps and outbreaks of fire. So it's like they have escaped a war zone or a natural disaster or a man-made disaster just to enter another one. And they were not even mentally prepared for that because there was this hope that they had. So it's like living trauma and then re-experiencing that trauma. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, that the host country may not be in a position to provide enough mental health support. For example, in UK, we have such a massive number of people on the NHS waiting list who need referrals, who are in need of psychotherapy or counseling, and they have been on the waiting list for a very long time. So if the host country is already overwhelmed, how can they cater the needs of people who are already vulnerable?
So you brought up a very good subject of the immigration detention centers at the start of your question. According to a statistic, about 20,000 people face immigration detention every year in the UK. Although UK is making progress because of all the recommendations being made by the Human Rights Commission and the Royal College about trying to reduce it, and the Royal College of Psychiatrists has come up with a report um, uh, in the last 2 years, about 2000, end of 2018, making strong recommendations and urging the government who was passing tougher laws without going into too much politics, was going to pass tougher laws for making detentions easier. So the Royal College of Psychiatrists has urged the government to not detain people unless it's absolutely necessary, and work towards reducing the numbers in detention centers, because there is scientific evidence to prove that apart from whatever traumas, whatever precipitations to their mental ill health that people have faced in their pre-migratory phase, these detention centers independently on their own cause trauma of its own. So
Yes.
that's why, as a body of psychiatrists, we support that the government seriously think about reducing numbers in detention. Although, again, it might be politically favorable or unfavorable, and I wouldn't want to go into that area. But as a psychiatrist and as a humanist, it would be my recommendation and plea almost to the government to reduce those numbers. Coming to how we're going to have build up resources, I think we have enough resources to address problems of refugees. This is what makes UK unique in that sense, isn't it? We do offer a socialist setup in terms of healthcare, where the rich and the poor have equal access to free healthcare, and that should be no different when it comes to people who are from the most vulnerable sections of the society, and that being the migrants. So I
But
would say, sorry.
no, please go on.
Yeah, so I would say we can, as a society and as a health service, that's the NHS. Because I can speak, I don't speak for all of the NHS, but as an employee of the NHS, I think we can cater to the problems that we should. We have a responsibility, a social responsibility towards the people who are seen scientifically with evidence as the most vulnerable section of society, I would say.
You are, mashallah, bilingual. So if you come across a patient who is not able to speak English as their first language, for example, and say they have come from the Indian subcontinent, then you will be able to communicate with them. sometimes there is inavailability of interpreters, or maybe the interpreter is not well equipped with psychological knowledge to be able to communicate between the mental health professional and the patient. How do you address this problem as a professional?
So I think I come with a huge benefit, and practicing in an area like Birmingham, where we have
Mm,
a massive population from the subcontinent, and various diaspora of Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi origin living here. I come with a huge benefit. I see myself in a responsible position. I am contacted by a lot of clinicians to see patients. I'm contacted by a lot of solicitors
mm,
who are dealing with immigration cases because they find me in a better position to communicate. So as you know, my mother tongue is Urdu, and I speak good Urdu. So and I'm able to understand the problems in a much better way. Yes, interpreter helps in many situations where the assessor is not able to understand a language like Urdu or Bengali or
yeah,
Punjabi. But there might be limitations, as you said, in them understanding the psychological aspects or them
yeah,
understanding but not being able to convey. These remain issues in the real world. These are problems, but they can be dealt with whatever resources we have in terms of getting. Many a times they don't get interpreters as well. Although I must
yes.
say, many of the government agencies do make genuine effort to facilitate these things. Really, in my experience, at least.
How difficult it is for someone who is either a refugee, an immigrant, or an asylum seeker who has experienced, say, for example, any traumatic experience or has escaped genocide or anything which is quite, painful in itself. How are they able to communicate? And I'm not referring to language, because you mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you feel, because I am sure you come across a lot of cases, a lot of patients who are experiencing symptoms of post traumatic stress or depression or severe anxiety, but what are the most common presenting problems that you come across as a professional when you cater the needs of these vulnerable people?
So, common mental health issues, I think that I come across from the point of view of mental health diagnosis, really. As a psychiatrist, I'm trained to kind of diagnose people with pathologies which are defined in from a psychiatric point of view. And in mentioning these, I don't want to minimize the sufferings of other people who might not have a formal diagnosis. Nonetheless, their problems are important as well. However, the most common formal diagnoses that I come across are depression. A
Hmm.
lot of people, especially more common in women, anxiety, again very common. All forms of anxiety. We have kind of talked a bit about PTSD
Yeah.
from when people come from war-torn areas and stuff like that.
Hmm.
They are adjustment disorders. So people might be seen with depression and anxiety, which might be transient and self-limiting, not seen after 6 months, but in those 6 months they are still going through hell.
Yeah.
And last but not the least, I do see psychotic illness, schizophrenia as well. So schizophrenia is one
Wow.
of the illnesses where there is a causal linkage between migration and the illness itself.
Wow. What about those people who are already suffering from some kind of mental health difficulty? Say, for example, there is somebody who already has OCD or who is already suffering from depression or any other mental health disorder. And then on top of that, they leave their home country and move to another one. What challenges do they face?
So at the start, when we mentioned about biological factors affecting a person's mental health, so your 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 description of the problem of someone suffering from an illness already before moving, like OCD or depression or any anxiety
Yeah.
problems, comes under that. So biological factors means factors related to a person's body itself or the person itself, either a genetic predisposition or a pre-existing problem like OCD, what you mentioned, um, and and that I think adds to the sufferings of the migration. So
Yeah.
a lot depends in the pre-migratory phase. A lot depends on the person's biological makeup, their personality, their resilience. So if a person is already vulnerable to start
Mm.
with, the problems added on by the migration may make them more vulnerable to
Of
problems.
course.
I'm not saying each and every one will suffer from problems, but yeah, uh, they, this will the migration, I mean, will definitely add to their pre-existing vulnerabilities or the mental ill health.
What about children under the age of young people under the age of 18? What about the challenges they face, the mental health difficulties they experience in a new country?
So migration issues with children have quite complex and variable history of research and evidence. So by that I mean the research done in children's problems or in children migrants. Um,
Hmm.
Children can be are usually secondary migrants. That is, they come with their family, their parents.
Yeah.
But sometimes they are primary migrants as well, running away, especially seen from northern Africa or mid Africa, where conflict have given rise to children fleeing from the war zones on their own, or having lost their parents or primary caregivers. So and then there are children who come with their parents. It has been variable, the results that have been obtained from the research in these subjects. Basically, in some cases, it has been seen that younger the age, it's better for the child to migrate. So, in the evidence, it has come out in some studies that children who have migrated before the age of 12
Hmm.
adapted better to the host society, learned the language better, were able to get on with the culture better and fare well in their later lives. Uh, but also they are opposing outcomes in some other studies where children came with their parents and because of being young, I mean by young I mean younger than 12, witnessed parents going through various problems that the migrants face, and because they were young and so dependent on their parents, they became more anxious and depressed. Kind
Hmm.
of transferred their parents' mental health issues. So the results have been varying. But generally, again, according to the human rights policy and commission recommendations, the
Yeah.
children must receive utmost care, and it's the responsibility of our health resources, really.
One of the things that you mentioned and highlighted is there are certain issues that are specific to women who leave their home countries and move to another country, not necessarily seeking refuge, but even as an immigrant. Say, for example, they come here after getting married. For them, it's a cultural shock as well to
Sure.
adjust in a new kind of country, culture. They're not accustomed to a lot of social factors. So this change, of process from coming from one culture to another. How do you explain that? This whole process
Yeah.
of adaptation.
That's a very good question coming from discussing the issues of children. Another special group that needs discussion is migration issues in women. So women
Mm.
globally migrate at a rate similar to men, but
Okay.
migration affects them differently. Again, as I mentioned, in case of children, an additional way is there for migration of women as well. So women can come with their families, which is known as secondary migration, or they can come primarily where they come in as single migrants. And a third way is usually for reunification with their partners, having married to a spouse in UK or wherever is the host country.
Yeah.
Um, To understand the specific ways in which women are impacted, female migration should be studied from the perspective of gender inequality, traditional female roles like pregnancy and child rearing, the universal prevalence of gender-based violence, and more
Mm,
suffering of women with poverty, more chances of women facing traumatic experiences. You've mentioned molestation, sexual abuse, human
mm,
trafficking. So women
yes.
are more vulnerable in that sense compared to their male counterparts.
Mm,
As of this has been an impact on health of migrant women. So
yeah.
their physical, psychological, and economic well-being is also undermined, not only by their gender, but by intersecting forms of discrimination linked to their ethnicity, race, poverty, and migrant status. So
Mm,
we have to look at women's problems from all these angles. Not only all these factors are there, but migration adds to the complex mix of all these factors.
right. Um, People who are leaving one country, moving to another one, seeking employment, because a lot of countries that have experienced conflict or economical crisis, sometimes the only option left is to seek employment elsewhere. And it's quite difficult for individuals, young people, especially elderlies, who have to kind of move alongside their children to give them better opportunities. So we spoke about children, we spoke about women. What about the elderly population?
So yeah, many a times elderly population are secondary migrants, as you mentioned, coming in with their families. They have spent uh, um, the majority part of their life in their host country, but now having to move, it makes them all the more difficult. So they are not at the best of their learning abilities, adapting abilities in the elderly age. So many a times I have uh, people who come with their elderly parents to me, saying
Mm,
they are having problems or psychological issues adjusting to this new country. And also their mental health issues are enhanced
mm,
because of having to learn a new culture. Uh, and there is a sense of bereavement in them, a sense of
yes,
loss, having
mm,
lost their home country, having lost their culture, having lost their language as perceived by them. So
yes.
they need more support and more care, in my view.
And I think the longer time that you spend in an environment, whether it's your country, your home, your residence, the more you get into your comfort zone. And the fact that you have to come out of your comfort zone, leave behind your friends, your relatives, your family, things that you were familiar with, that remind you of your childhood. It itself, quite as you said, it can be a bereavement process in itself, because you suddenly have to detach and dissociate yourself from all things that were once very familiar and you were comfortable with, to move to something which is not familiar, unknown, and then there is this fear of the unknown, and also the fact that most elderlies are finding it very challenging and difficult to settle in, to make new friends from scratch, or in various parts of the world, for example in Asian countries and even in Middle Eastern countries, neighbors are considered as part of the family. But when you move to the western part of the world, where you don't even know who your next door neighbor is, that can be quite daunting experience for them, living with complete strangers, not being able to communicate, interact on a daily basis like you used to do in your home country. Does that have an impact as well on your psychological well-being?
Definitely, I couldn't agree more with that. I have come across cases regularly in my practice where, as I said, I have seen elderly patients above 55, 60 years old, where they've had to deal with all these issues. coming to a new country. So I would say I completely agree with you.
Any sort of advice you would like to give to people who are trying their best to kind of adapt to the new environment, but they're still finding it really difficult and challenging, especially during these times with COVID and social distancing and
Yes. And this is for, I think I'd like to discuss a phenomenon called acculturation. So this not only applies to older people, but all of the migrants, applies to second generation, children of migrants, grandchildren of migrants as well.
right.
Acculturation is a process where you come from a native culture and you come into a host culture. So back home
Mm,
from India or Pakistan, you've come here and you are in this new culture. The process where these two cultures interact in whatever way is known as acculturation. So and there are four types of interactions that take place. And some of them are healthy and some of them are unhealthy, according to scientific evidence that we've seen. So, firstly, there is a type of acculturation known as assimilation, where you lose all the traits of your home culture and adapt all
mm,
the traits of your host culture, which is the
right.
dominant culture in your host country. The other way is integration, where you pick up good bits of the host culture while not losing the good bits of your culture, and that's
Mm,
called as integration. And then there is
right.
separation, where you don't want to lose anything from your culture and separate yourself completely from the host culture, and that leads to what we call as formation of ethnic enclaves or ghettoization. And
Mm,
then the last type is marginalization. So you basically marginalize yourself, don't lose everything from your culture, and don't take
mm,
anything from the host culture as well. So these are the various combinations and permutations that are possible. Now, from evidence, the best form of acculturation is integration. So,
mm,
for example, if I come from an Indian Asian background, Pakistani background, an Islamic background, I retain the values of my religion, of my culture, which are very good, and then
yeah.
also adapt or adopt values from the culture here, which I deem are good for me and are in agreement with my own principles and values, and that's the best form of acculturation that's possible. So coming to your question about what would be my advice to all immigrants, whether they be refugees or asylum seekers or second generation migrants or first generation migrants, voluntary, involuntary migrants who have come here for employment or education or war torn or trauma from traumatic
Mm,
experiences, is to go for the healthy way of assimilating into the society by way of integration
yes.
into the
Yes.
society.
What about those people or those families who have migrated more than once, maybe more than like 5 times? For example, in the Indian subcontinent, when the partition took place and lots of families and households, they moved from India and Bangladesh to Pakistan, then from Pakistan to another country, and then they fled that country to seek safety or refuge in some other country. Does that have an impact on the individuals or the members of that family? Like, I'm referring to transgenerational trauma here.
Exactly, exactly. You're talking about migration that takes place over generations, over years, from various countries. It's not uncommon, surprisingly,
Mm,
where people have started their migrations even 100 years ago when they moved from the Indian subcontinent to somewhere in northern Africa, Tanzania, for example, Kenya, and then they moved to a European country and then moved to UK about 5 years ago, and this
mm,
has happened over the last 70 years, 80 years, for when their grandparents started the migration. Um, Unfortunately, the research in overall the area of migration and the outcomes is still restricted. I'm not aware of any good studies done on this subject, but generally, I would like to kind of look into more of these. But I would say this type of migration is still governed by all the principles and factors that we have discussed previously, which is like making people more vulnerable because of all the factors that administer the migrational uh, move.
I think for anybody who's watching right now is interested in doing their PhD and they're looking for a topic of research, I think they can explore this area, inshallah. Um, in regards to statistics, you gave a lot of examples. Countries that are mainly comprised of immigrants. There are many countries in this world. I think 80 or 70% of the population it's made up of immigrants. It's very diverse. We talked about a lot of negative aspects on the psychological being of an individual. Let's talk about the positive impact that it has on a person's psyche.
I think I see myself as a migrant as well, a voluntary migrant who came here for educational and employment opportunities, and I think as a group, migrants, we bring a lot to the host country, and I think the government of United Kingdoms acknowledges that. Uh, uh, our impact on the economy, our impact in the labor sector, employment sector, uh, is well acknowledged. Uh,
Mm,
we see a lot of educational achievements by Asians in these fields, really. And I think that is why the government does provide opportunities because of how we affect the economy and the well-being of this country. NHS, where I have been employed for the last 16, 17 years, according to some statistics, about 40% of the workforce of NHS comes from people of Asian and other immigrant backgrounds. So I think we bring a lot of positive factors to the host country, and going forward in an integrated way is the future, I would say.
and when you move to a new environment, new culture, you're exposed to different cuisines and beliefs and faith. How does that empower you as a person? How does it help an individual grow in a positive way?
I think exposure to new cultures, which can be their way of life, new religious values, looking at different faiths, how they function, looking at various life activities of different cultures, how a society functions, what are the moral values, ethical values of a society? Are they how are they in comparison to where you came from? All this acts as an additive factor in formation of your personality. I think it's quite positive and enriching experience, I would say, that
Yeah.
makes you a better informed person. I think in Islam, we have recommendations about people who
Oh, yes.
travel and gain knowledge, and I think
Mm.
that refers the ahadith refer to this kind of travelers. I see myself and people like the migrants uh, receiving this knowledge and enriching our personalities and resilience because of exposure to all these things.
And yes, this reminds me of the fact that in our faith, I mean, this is the beauty of Islam, that your du'as are accepted while you're traveling. And to make things easier for a traveler, there are flexibilities that you can reduce the number of rakats that you pray in your farz salah. You can reduce it from 4 to 2. It's because Allah understands, He knows, He's aware of the challenges a traveler faces during his journey, and it's not always an easy one, and you come across a lot of obstacles. And just to make things easier, there are so many like flexibilities and amendments in the rules that have been made just to make our life easier. But we as human beings, we need to understand, we have to show not just sympathy, but also empathy to those who have crossed the border or who have fled their home country for a better livelihood, for better opportunities. And if there's anything we can do to support them in any way, then I think we also have a religious obligation to do so, not just a moral and ethical one.
Of course, I couldn't agree more with you. I think what you've said, I think reinforces as my earlier statement about special status given to travelers in Islam. And I think we have a moral obligation and a religious obligation to be aware of the problems that can be faced by migrants of any type, and then providing opportunities, availabilities of resources to help ease their difficulties and problems, not only in the context of social normalization of, but acceptance of them in host community, providing them with ample economic, employment, educational opportunities, and helping them as the host community, or as we call it famously in Islam, the Ansar.
Yes.
The,
Muhajirun, yeah. Yeah.
exactly.
Any self-care tips or advice you would like to give to people who are currently going through that change, that transformation?
I come from a psychiatric background. I would say that being aware psychologically of your positive and positive factors, as well as your weaknesses, trying to reflect on what factors of resilience you have within yourself, identifying problems early, and being aware
Mhm.
of what can go wrong, seeking help early. There are problems, be it from psychological problems, or be it from external factors like facing persecution, facing domestic violence. So being aware of all these things, how these factors affect your mental health, being aware of what help is. There are a lot of agencies available in this country for everything. Being aware of that, educating yourself in English, and being able to go on the internet and look for resources and getting help. It's easier than most of the home countries that we come from in terms of seeking proper help channels. So I would say seek help early, and then address those problems head on, instead of uh, suffering with these problems for a long time, and then letting them fester.
And what's the best way to do that? Should they contact their GP and then ask the GP to refer them to someone?
Yes, that's the most common and the easiest way. Um,
Mm.
I have referrals from GPs in my practice, in my NHS practice. In other practice, I have referrals commonly from solicitors who have come across these cases in terms of immigration cases, but then they have identified mental health issues, and they know a psychiatrist, and then they have referred. I come across referrals from social services, social workers who have come across these cases for various social issues. So, but the most common and the easiest way is through your GP.
What advice would you like to give to those women, young girls, who came to this country, got married, and they're trying to settle down and start a new life, but then the households they have married into or the spouses they have are quite abusive or misusing the fact that they are in a vulnerable place and position? What advice would you like to give to these people?
This is a big subject on its own, and we require an hour if we start to discuss this. But in short, I would say, surprisingly, Barisa, women, of course, are more commonly the victims, but also, not uncommonly, I do come across men as well who have migrated in a spousal relationship, on a spouse visa namely, and do face domestic abuse from the host family, or the spousal family, or the spouse. Again, there are resources available. people are usually scared because
Yes.
it's a new country, new environment. I would say,
Yes.
don't be too scared. The police here are very fair. The social services here are very fair. They will try to be objective. There are resources available. Um, for example, talked about interpreters who will be able to translate your problems to the agencies and seek help. I would say if that's what is going through. Many a times I come across domestic violence victims, especially women who don't even convey their problems to their own parents back home. I would
Yes.
say
Yes.
be open about your problems. Don't endure it on your own and end up in more tragic circumstances than you are already in,
Thank
and be open and about these problems.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahmood, for the valuable information that you have shared today with our viewers. Jazakumullah khairan for that.
Thank you, Arisa.
Next Saturday, we'll see you with another topic and another guest. Till then, look after yourselves and especially your mental health. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum.